Grand Administrator Nix Tal flicked his tertiary appendages in what his species recognized as barely contained frustration. His primary eyes narrowed at the holographic display, while his secondary visual organs monitored the reaction of the assembled council members. The Galactic Survival Academy had stood as the premier training facility across 17 sectors for nearly 8,000 cycles, and never had Nix witnessed such an absolute travesty of protocol. "You cannot be serious," he said, his voice modulator carefully calibrated to convey calm authority despite the panic flooding his neural pathways. "These humans cannot possibly be admitted. Their planetary classification alone should disqualify them." Commander Lorix Ben-Dra, head of admissions and longtime friend of Nix, made the universal gesture of resignation, a slow rotation of her upper thorax that sent ripples through her ceremonial membrane cloak. "The Treaty of Unified Species is quite clear," she replied, her voice tinged with the harmonic overtones of amusement. "Any sentient species that achieves faster than light travel must be offered admission to the Academy. No exceptions. Not even for," she paused dramatically, Deathworlders. The gathered administrators erupted in a cacophony of clicks, whistles, and electromagnetic pulses, their various biological communication methods conveying the same sentiment: absolute horror. "Quiet. Quiet." Nix's voice boomed through the chamber, enhanced by the room's acoustic amplifiers. Yes, I understand your concerns. Trust me, I share them. But Commander Ben-Dra is correct. The treaty is binding. Senior Instructor Plex Zandox, an ancient Vexillian whose exoskeleton had faded from its youthful blue to a distinguished pale gray, raised a gnarled limb. "With all due respect, Administrator," Plex's voice rasped through his partially calcified speech orifice, "have any of you actually reviewed the planetary data on this, Earth?" He practically spat the word, his distaste evident. Gravity at 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmospheric oxygen levels that would cause spontaneous combustion in half our member species. Daily temperature variations that would shatter a crystalline's outer matrix. Not to mention the horrifying levels of background radiation and the positively murderous wildlife. Holo displays around the chamber activated, showing images of Earth's natural wonders, hurricanes, volcanoes, lightning storms, tsunamis, and various predators with entirely too many teeth. "And these creatures evolved on this nightmare sphere?" asked Curriculum Director Tazi Moore, her luminescent tendrils pulsing with anxiety. "How are they not constantly terrified?" "That's just it," replied xenobiologist Krell Vox, adjusting his atmosphere suit with a nervous tick. "According to our preliminary studies, they find their world pleasant, even boring at times. They deliberately seek out danger for something they call fun or adventure. Their entertainment broadcasts are filled with scenarios that would traumatize most civilized beings." The room fell silent as this information sank in. Nick sighed, a habit he'd picked up from the Ventulian delegation and found oddly satisfying. The decision has been made. The humans have been accepted. 4 of them arrive tomorrow to begin training. He waved a limb dismissively at the concerned murmurs. Yes, I know. But our course is designed to take a full century to complete, even for the most gifted students. I suspect these Deathworlders will quickly realize they're out of their depth and withdraw voluntarily. Commander Ben-Dra made that strange snorting sound that indicated skepticism. "Don't underestimate them, Nix. The preliminary psych evaluations indicate they're quite resilient." "Resilient?" Nix laughed, the sound like glass breaking. "They'll need more than resilience to survive our course. No species has ever completed it in less than 75 cycles. Most take the full century, and many never graduate at all. These humans will be no different." Little did Grand Administrator Nix Tal know just how catastrophically wrong he was about to be proven. For the benefit of our newer faculty members, Nix announced, activating the central holo display, "I believe a brief overview of our centennial survival curriculum is in order, especially given tomorrow's unusual circumstances." The chamber darkened as a three-dimensional model of the Academy's training grounds materialized, a massive artificial planetoid with 12 distinct biome segments, each more hazardous than the last. The GSA's 100-year course is the most comprehensive survival training program in the known galaxy, Nix continued, his pride momentarily overriding his concerns. It begins with the basic adaptation phase, which typically takes most species 15 to 20 cycles to complete. The display zoomed in on the first segment, a relatively benign-looking forest environment. "Don't be fooled by its appearance," warned Senior Instructor Plex, noticing the dismissive gestures from several junior staff members. The atmospheric composition shifts randomly between 27 different chemical mixtures. The gravity fluctuates between 0.3 and 2.7 standard units without warning. And the indigenous flora contains over 800 distinct toxins that must be identified and cataloged by students before they can progress. Not to mention the nocturnal predator simulations, added combat trainer Jirix Kal, a rare Feliune whose ancestors had evolved as apex predators themselves. "We've lost 16 students in the past decade to panic-induced respiratory failure alone. And that's just in Phase 1. Nix nodded solemnly. Phase 2 introduces extreme temperature variance and pressure challenges. It typically requires 12 to 15 cycles to master. The display shifted to show frozen tundras transitioning suddenly to blazing deserts. The record for completion stands at 8 cycles, held by champion Thrix of the Vargos Collective. Commander Ben Draw cleared her throat, or whatever passed for a throat in her species' unusual anatomy. Perhaps we should skip ahead to Phase 7. The psychological endurance chamber. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. The display shifted to show a featureless white cube. Nothing about it appeared threatening, yet several faculty members visibly recoiled. "Ah, yes," Nix said quietly. Phase 7. 20 cycles of isolation, sensory manipulation, and reality distortion. Students must maintain perfect psychological baseline readings while the chamber induces hallucinations, time dilation, and memory alterations. Many consider it the true breaking point of the curriculum. "I still have nightmares," whispered Curriculum Director Tassi Moore. "And I only experienced the demonstration version for 6 rotations." Nix quickly advanced the presentation. Phases 8 through 11 involve increasingly complex survival scenarios, culminating in Phase 12, the extinction event. The display showed a world in chaos, simultaneous natural disasters, atmospheric collapse, and celestial bombardment. Students must not only survive themselves but ensure the survival of a randomly assigned ecosystem for a minimum of 5 cycles. Most spend the final 25 to 30 years of their training here, perfecting their techniques. The display deactivated, returning the chamber to its normal illumination. "No single phase has ever been completed in less than 3 cycles," Nix concluded, his tone conveying the weight of this fact. "The physiological and psychological recalibration periods alone make faster progression impossible." The course was specifically designed for the long-lived species of our galaxy, with built-in recovery periods between challenges. And yet, xenobiologist Krill Vox interjected, "These humans have an average lifespan of less than a single century. Even if they survive, which I find highly improbable, they would spend their entire lives here." Nix's facial membranes fluttered in what might have been a smile. "Precisely. Which is why I suspect our visitors will politely withdraw once they understand the true nature of our program." Jirix Kal, whose species possessed a unique form of intuition, shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not so sure, Administrator. There's something about the human psychological profiles that troubles me. They have an unusual relationship with time." "Nonsense," Nix replied dismissively. "In time is the one universal constant. No species experiences it differently." How wrong he would prove to be. The arrival bay of the Galactic Survival Academy hummed with an unusual energy as faculty gathered to witness the unprecedented event. Most graduating classes contained hundreds of students from dozens of species. Today, they awaited only 4 individuals from a single, unknown world. "They're late," muttered Nix, checking his chronometer for the 8th time in as many minutes. Actually, corrected Lorix Ben Draw. They're 3 minutes early according to the standardized galactic schedule we provided them. Before Nix could respond, the bay's massive doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss. The assembled faculty fell silent as 4 figures stepped through the threshold. Even prepared by briefings and data packets, many gasped at their first in-person sight of humans. They walked on 2 legs, their bodies exposed to the environment with only thin coverings. No exoskeletons, no protective membranes, no redundant respiratory systems visible at all. And most disturbing, they appeared to be smiling. Greetings, esteemed educators of the GSA. The lead human's voice boomed across the chamber without technological amplification. I'm Captain Maya Rodriguez of Earth Expeditionary Force. These are my colleagues, Dr. Jackson Chen, our xenobiologist, Lieutenant Aisha Okafor, survival specialist, and Engineer Thomas Novak, our tech expert. Nick stepped forward, his ceremonial robes rustling. Welcome to the Galactic Survival Academy. I am Grand Administrator Nix Vortal. I must inform you that processing your enrollment will take approximately 3 standard cycles, after which your century of training will. The human called Maya laughed. The sound startled several faculty members so severely that their defense mechanisms activated. Jirex's fur stood on end, Tazi's bioluminescence flashed warning patterns, and 2 junior instructors released defensive pheromones. 3 days for paperwork? That's bureaucracy for you, eh? Universal constant. Maya winked an alarming single-eyed blink that rippled unease through the gathered aliens. But about that century timeline, we actually have a bit of a scheduling conflict. Nix's tertiary appendages twitched involuntarily. Scheduling conflict? The human named Jackson stepped forward, consulting a primitive wrist-mounted device. Yes, I'm afraid Earth Command only authorized a 48-hour training excursion. We're due back by 0800 Saturday. This is preposterous. Plex Zandox's exoskeleton clattered with indignation. The basic adaptation phase alone requires a minimum of 15 cycles. That's approximately 15 of your Earth years. The 4 humans exchanged glances, and the one called Aisha shrugged a rolling motion of her upper appendages that several xenobiologists frantically recorded for later study. Sounds like we'll have to work quickly then, she said, her tone light but her eyes unnervingly forward-facing predator eyes scanning the room with unsettling intensity. We've reviewed your course syllabus. 12 phases, increasing difficulty, mixture of physical and psychological challenges. Shouldn't be a problem. Not a problem? Xenobiologist Krell's voice modulator failed momentarily from stress. Do you comprehend the impossibility of what you're suggesting? No species in the history of the Academy has completed even a single phase in less than 3 cycles. Engineer Thomas Novak, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. He was the smallest of the humans, yet faculty members found themselves instinctively backing away. With respect, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle, your other students weren't from Earth. He smiled, revealing those disturbing flat teeth that somehow seemed more threatening than proper fangs. We're quite motivated to complete your training. Our world has prepared us well. Curriculum Director Tazi Moore's tendrils coiled tightly against her body, a sign of extreme distress in her species. Administrator Nikes, surely we must explain that accelerated completion is physically impossible. The recovery periods alone. Recovery periods? Interrupted Lieutenant Okafor, looking genuinely confused. For what exactly? The silence that followed was profound. These creatures didn't understand the need for recovery. What manner of evolution had produced such beings? Perhaps, suggested Nix, desperately attempting to salvage the situation, we should begin with a tour of the facility while your accommodation pods are prepared? Captain Rodriguez nodded enthusiastically. Perfect. Though we packed our own sleeping bags, much more comfortable than pods. Several faculty members fainted. This is unprecedented. Absolutely unprecedented. Plex Zandox paced back and forth in the observation chamber, his exoskeleton making an anxious clicking sound with each agitated step. They've been in Phase 1 for exactly 2.4 hours, and they've already identified 637 of the toxic compounds. The faculty observation room overlooked the basic adaptation phase environment through one-way quantum glass. Below, the 4 humans moved through the simulated forest with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. While Aisha and Maya collected and cataloged plant samples at an alarming rate, Jackson appeared to be tasting minute quantities of substances, and Thomas had constructed a crude but effective atmospheric analyzer from components in his pack. "How is that Chin human not dead?" Krell Vox demanded, his scientific curiosity momentarily overriding his horror. "He has directly sampled 14 compounds that would paralyze most sentient beings." Commander Ben Draa studied her datapad with growing disbelief. According to his biological scans, his liver is processing the toxins at an extraordinary rate. Their species appears to have evolved a remarkably efficient detoxification system. And they're completely ignoring the gravity fluctuations. Jirex Kal noted, his tail lashing with nervous energy. "Look at that. The gravity just jumped to 2.2 standard units, and Rodriguez didn't even break stride." Nix leaned forward, pressing his primary eyes against the viewing panel. "What are they doing now? Are they splitting up?" Indeed, the humans had separated, each taking a different quadrant of the testing area. This strategy was unheard of. Students typically remained in tight groups for at least the first 5 cycles, relying on collective knowledge and protection. "They've established a communications system," Tazimore observed, her tendrils extending toward the monitoring equipment. "They're using primitive radio waves and something they call hand signals." A sudden dimming of the artificial light indicated the beginning of the nocturnal predator simulation. This particular challenge had been designed to induce primal fear responses in even the most courageous species. The simulated predators combined the most terrifying aspects of apex hunters from a dozen worlds' silent movement, infrared sensing capabilities, paralytic venom, and psychological warfare tactics. "Now we'll see some appropriate caution," Nick said with something approaching satisfaction. "The Night Hunters have caused even the warrior castes of the Drengen Empire to retreat in panic. But instead of clustering together or seeking shelter, the humans did something completely unexpected. They set traps." "What in the name of the ancestral void are they doing?" gasped a junior instructor, watching as Thomas rapidly constructed what appeared to be primitive snares, while Aisha positioned herself in a tree with a simple projectile weapon she'd fashioned from local materials. The first simulated predator emerged from the undergrowth 3 meters of sinuous muscle, razor appendages, and predatory intelligence. It moved silently toward Jackson, who appeared to be vulnerable as he continued cataloging plants despite the darkness. "At least one of them is about to learn a valuable lesson," Plex muttered. But as the creature prepared to pounce, Jackson calmly reached into his pocket and scattered a handful of some crystalline substance in a circle around himself. The predator crossed the line and immediately retreated, emitting a high-pitched shriek that caused several faculty members to cover their auditory organs. "Salt," Krell exclaimed in disbelief. "He weaponized common sodium chloride. How did he know the simulation creatures would react to it?" "He didn't," Lorix replied quietly. "He's been systematically testing different compounds against all potential threats. Look at his notes. He has contingencies for 16 different predator types already documented." Meanwhile, on the other side of the testing area, Maya Rodriguez was doing something even more shocking. She was hunting the hunters. Moving with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for such a dense-boned species, she stalked a pair of predators, herding them toward Aisha's position. When they passed beneath the tree, Aisha launched her projectiles with deadly accuracy, striking the creature's simulated neural clusters. "They're working as a coordinated hunting unit," Jirex whispered, professional admiration coloring his voice. "Like a pack of apex predators." By morning, when the lights gradually brightened to signal the end of the night cycle, the humans had not only survived, they had cataloged every predator type, identified all toxic compounds, mapped the entire Phase 1 environment, and established a base camp with defensive perimeters. Administrator, Tazimore said, her voice trembling slightly, at their current rate of progress, they'll complete Phase 1 in under 6 hours. Nix stared at the humans, who were now casually eating their morning rations while comparing notes, laughing and joking, as if they'd just enjoyed a pleasant evening stroll rather than survived what should have been a traumatic ordeal. "This is impossible," he murmured. "Completely impossible." But the evidence was right before his eyes. The Deathworlders were just getting started. Phase 6. They've reached Phase 6 in 14 hours. Nix's voice had lost its authoritative resonance, now wavering between disbelief and something approaching panic. The extreme environment labyrinth was supposed to take at least 8 cycles. The observation chamber had become crowded as word spread throughout the academy. Instructors abandoned their regular duties, researchers neglected ongoing projects, and even the kitchen staff had found excuses to witness the unprecedented event. The room's environmental controls struggled to compensate for the heat generated by so many bodies pressed together in shared astonishment. On the monitors, 4 humans navigated the notorious Phase 6 challenge, a constantly shifting maze where each section represented a different lethal environment. One moment, corridors filled with corrosive acid rain; the next, they transformed into vacuum chambers or pressurized deep-sea simulations. "Look at Rodriguez," gasped a junior instructor, pointing at the main display. "She's mapping the temporal pattern of the shifts." Indeed, Captain Maya had positioned herself at a junction, making rapid notes as sections transformed around her. Meanwhile, Thomas worked on modifying their environmental suits. Jackson collected samples from each new environment, and Aisha scouted ahead, marking safe routes with a bioluminescent compound she'd somehow synthesized from materials in earlier phases. "Impossible," muttered Plex for perhaps the 100th time that day. "The randomization algorithms are quantum-based. There shouldn't be a pattern." "There isn't," replied Krell, who had been frantically analyzing the data. "But they're identifying micro-delays in the transition sequences, gaps of less than 0.3 seconds between environmental shifts. They're timing their movements to those gaps." The faculty watched in stunned silence as the humans executed a series of precisely timed sprints, dashes, and rolls through the labyrinth, occasionally pausing in safety zones to regroup and compare notes. "Wait, what's Chen doing now?" Tazi's tendrils extended in alarm. Oh, Jackson had removed his helmet in a section simulating the methane atmosphere of a gas giant. According to all biological models, he should have immediately lost consciousness. Instead, he took a cautious breath, held it, nodded to his teammates, and replaced his helmet. He's testing how long he can survive in each environment unprotected, Lorix realized, her voice a mixture of horror and reluctant admiration. They're categorizing the environments by lethality timers. "But why?" demanded Jerex. "Why risk death for such information?" "Because they're not planning their route through the maze," Nix said quietly, the terrible truth dawning on him. "They're planning their route around it." As if confirming his suspicion, Thomas suddenly produced a small device from his pack. He attached it to a wall, adjusted several settings, and stepped back. A localized disruptor field appeared just large enough for a human to pass through. "They're breaking through the walls." Plex's exoskeleton rattled with outrage. That's cheating, actually." Lorix corrected, quickly reviewing the Academy bylaws on her datapad. The guidelines state that students must successfully navigate from entrance to exit while demonstrating mastery of extreme environment survival techniques. There's nothing explicitly forbidding the creation of alternative pathways. "Of course there isn't," Plex sputtered. "No other species would even consider such an approach." On the screen, the humans had created a direct route through 3 separate sections, bypassing nearly 2/3 of the labyrinth. They moved with practiced efficiency, each fulfilling their role in what appeared to be a well-rehearsed operation. "How?" whispered Nix. "How are they doing this?" They've never seen these challenges before. A visiting xenopsychologist who had joined the growing audience cleared her throat. According to their historical database, humans regularly engage in recreational activities they call escape rooms and obstacle courses for entertainment. Their military training incorporates similar challenges. This isn't new to them, it's literally what they do for fun. Fun, repeated Jirex, tasting the alien concept. They find this enjoyable? As if in answer. The observation room's audio pickups captured a burst of laughter from Ayesha as she narrowly avoided a jet of plasma by executing a diving roll that would have broken bones in most species. "Did you see that?" Her voice came through clearly. "Just like that time in Death Valley, but with better special effects." "Minus the rattlesnakes," Jackson responded dryly, while carefully collecting a sample of the plasma with a specialized container. "I almost missed the snakes," Thomas chimed in. "At least they don't rearrange the landscape every 30 seconds. Maya's voice cut through their banter. "Less chatting, more moving. We've got 6 more phases to complete before dinner, people." Dinner. They expected to reach Phase 12, the extinction event, by their next meal period. "Administrator," Tazi said slowly, "I think we may need to reconsider our understanding of what constitutes a death world." Nix could only nod in mute agreement as he watched the humans complete Phase 6 in less than 20 minutes. Phase 12. The extinction event. Nix's voice had become a hollow whisper. The observation chamber was now so crowded that environmental safety protocols had activated emergency ventilation systems. Nearly every member of the Academy staff, plus dozens of visiting dignitaries who had arrived via emergency transport upon hearing the impossible news, pressed against viewing screens. 22 hours had passed since the humans' arrival. 22 hours to progress through challenges that had been designed to take a century. "They can't possibly survive this one," Plex insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. "No species has ever completed the extinction event in less than 25 cycles. The ecological balancing alone requires decades of careful manipulation." The final phase had been designed as the ultimate test, a simulated planetary collapse featuring simultaneous catastrophes, volcanic eruptions, meteorite impacts, atmospheric degradation, tectonic instability, and the collapse of multiple interdependent ecosystems. Students were evaluated not only on personal survival but on their ability to preserve crucial biodiversity through the crisis. The 4 humans stood at the entrance to the massive simulation chamber, reviewing data on their primitive devices. They looked tired, their strange, exposed skin glistening with that disturbing liquid cooling mechanism they called sweat, but their postures remained alert, energetic, almost eager. "They should be experiencing complete physical exhaustion by now," noted Medical Director Vrelsek, who had spent the last several hours monitoring their biological readouts with increasing fascination. "Their cortisol levels are elevated, but nowhere near dangerous thresholds. And look at their neurotransmitter activity: dopamine, adrenaline, endorphins, all indicating positive stress responses. They're still enjoying this." "Turn up the audio," commanded Nix. "I want to hear what they're planning." The humans' voices filled the chamber. "Reminds me of that training scenario in Yellowstone," Maya was saying, studying the environmental readings. "Multiple cascading failures, interconnected systems. Except this time we don't have NASA backing us up," Jackson replied, organizing his collection kit. "We're looking at complete ecosystem collapse within 8 hours unless we stabilize the primary food web." "The volcanic chain is the key," Thomas said, pointing to a geological readout. "If we can reduce pressure in these 3 chambers, we might buy enough time to implement atmospheric scrubbers. While you 3 handle that, I'll focus on preserving the keystone species," Ayesha added, checking her equipment. "The simulation data indicates 17 critical organisms we need to secure for viable recovery." "Like Noah's Ark meets Dante's Inferno," Jackson quipped, earning chuckles from his teammates. "Let's synchronize watches," Maya said. "We meet back at the entrance in 7 hours, regardless of progress. Priority 1 is survival. Priority 2 is ecosystem preservation." "And priority 3? asked Thomas with a raised eyebrow. Maya grinned, that alarming baring of teeth that still made many faculty members flinch. Priority 3 is finishing with enough time for a proper meal before our transport arrives tomorrow. I'm not leaving on an empty stomach. They bumped fists, a ritualistic gesture that xenocultural analysts were still debating the significance of, and plunged into the chaotic simulation without hesitation. What followed defied explanation. The humans moved through the disintegrating environment with what could only be described as practiced familiarity. While most species approached Phase 12 with careful, methodical conservation strategies developed over decades, the humans attacked the problems with immediate, decisive action. Aisha rapidly collected breeding pairs of keystone species, establishing a portable sanctuary system using materials scavenged from the environment itself. Jackson identified and neutralized cascading toxicity in the water systems while simultaneously cultivating crucial microbial colonies. Thomas constructed a network of pressure release channels for the volcanic system, somehow calculating optimal placement despite the complex geophysics involved. And Maya Captain Rodriguez coordinated it all, while personally tackling the atmospheric degradation by creating a series of chemical reactions that gradually rebalanced gaseous ratios. They're treating it like it's real, Tazi realized, her tendrils weaving patterns of astonishment. Not as a simulation or test, but as an actual extinction event they must prevent. Because to them, it is real, Lorix said quietly. Their historical records show multiple near-extinction events on Earth. Massive climate shifts, asteroid impacts, supervolcano eruptions, pandemic diseases. Their species has survived them all. The assembled faculty watched in stunned silence as the extinction simulation, designed to humble even the most advanced students with its complexity and hopelessness, yielded step by step to human determination. 6 hours and 43 minutes after entering Phase 12, Aisha released a rehabilitated apex predator into a newly stabilized forest habitat, the final step in their ecosystem reconstruction. The simulation's assessment algorithms registered something unprecedented: full ecosystem recovery with a 96.7% biodiversity preservation rate. The humans had not merely survived the extinction event, they had reversed it. Nick stared at the success notification flashing on the main display, then at the 4 sweaty, dirt-covered, triumphantly grinning humans high-fiving each other amid the rejuvenated landscape. "It's impossible," he whispered, but it wasn't. Not for Deathworlders. Not for humans. The faculty lounge had never been so silent. Typically a hub of academic debate and professional gossip, the room now held 24 of the galaxy's most distinguished educators in a state of collective shock. They sat or stood in small clusters, many still staring at nothing, trying to process what they had witnessed. The humans had departed 3 hours ago. After completing all 12 phases of the Centennial Survival Course in precisely 27 hours and 14 minutes, they had cleaned up, enjoyed a hearty meal in the Academy's cafeteria, and boarded their transport back to Earth with casual waves and promises to keep in touch. They had left behind a shattered paradigm and an existential crisis for the Galactic Survival Academy. "I've submitted my resignation," Plex announced, breaking the heavy silence. His exoskeleton had dulled noticeably over the past day, a sign of extreme stress in his species. "My entire understanding of survival education is clearly outdated. I have nothing to teach after that." "Don't be dramatic, Plex," Nix replied, though without his usual authority. He sat hunched in a chair designed for a much larger species, looking somehow diminished. "None of us anticipated this outcome. We've all had our assumptions challenged." "Challenged?" Krell laughed, a bitter, crackling sound. "Our assumptions weren't challenged, they were obliterated. Everything we thought we knew about species development, evolutionary pressures, adaptive capabilities, all of it, wrong." Lorix Bayen-Jarre, who had been quietly reviewing data collected during the human stay, looked up from her pad. "Not wrong, necessarily. Just incomplete. We've been classifying worlds based on our own standards of habitability. Class M planets like Earth weren't designated death worlds because they're inherently lethal. They were classified that way because we couldn't survive there without significant technological assistance." But that means Tazi's tendrils writhed as the implications sank in. It means, Jerex continued, that to humans, most of our homeworlds would be the actual death worlds. Too little gravity, insufficient atmospheric pressure, inadequate radiation shielding, no predatory threats to hone evolutionary responses. A contemplative silence fell over the room as this perspective shift rippled through their understanding. You should have seen their faces when they toured our recreational facilities, volunteered a junior staff member who had been assigned as the human's guide. They were so polite about it, but it was obvious they found our idea of physical activity laughably inadequate. Lieutenant Okafor asked if our combat training simulator was designed for rehabilitation therapy, added another instructor, wincing at the memory. Nix tapped his claws against the table in a rhythmic pattern, a self-soothing behavior he'd rarely displayed in public. The most disturbing part was Phase 7, the psychological endurance chamber. Several faculty members visibly shuddered. They treated it like a game, Nix continued, his voice hollow. Chen called it a mild approximation of medical school residency. Novak fell asleep during the reality distortion sequence. In sleep, and Rodriguez Lorix hesitated. What about Rodriguez? Prompted Tazi. She broke the simulation, Lorix admitted. Not by hacking it or finding a technical vulnerability. She simply refused to accept the presented reality so completely that the system couldn't maintain coherence. The monitoring AI reported a fundamental logical paradox and shut down. How? Demanded Jerex. The system is designed to adapt to any mental resistance. Lorix looked uncomfortable. According to the logs, when presented with a scenario designed to induce hopelessness, she laughed and said, and I quote, "That's cute, but I'm from Chicago. Try harder." Despite everything, a ripple of nervous laughter spread through the room. A medical director Vril Sek, who had been quietly analyzing physiological data in the corner, suddenly straightened. I've identified something remarkable in their medical scans. Their stress response system, it's fundamentally different from anything we've seen before. Most species enter preservation mode when faced with extreme challenges. Systems shut down to conserve energy. Cognitive functions narrow to focus only on immediate threats. And the humans? Prompted Nix. They do the opposite. When stressed, their awareness expands. Cognitive function increases. Creative problem-solving improves. They become more capable under pressure, not less. It's as if their entire neurological system evolved specifically for crisis response. That explains their approach to Phase 12, nodded Krell. While our students methodically worked to prevent ecosystem collapse over decades, the humans thrived in the chaos, addressing multiple catastrophic events simultaneously. So what do we do now? Asked Plex, his resignation apparently forgotten in the face of this scientific fascination. Our entire curriculum is based on the assumption that survival challenges should be approached with careful, measured responses over extended time frames. Nix rose from his chair, his posture gradually regaining some of its former dignity. We adapt. We learn. We evolve our understanding just as we've always taught our students to do. He moved to the center of the room, commanding attention once more. The humans have shown us something profound about the nature of survival itself. It's not merely about enduring harsh conditions, it's about transcending them, transforming challenges into opportunities. They didn't just survive our course, Lorix agreed. They conquered it. And they did it with humor, added Tassi, her tendrils now displaying patterns of academic excitement rather than distress. Laughter in the face of adversity, perhaps that's the most powerful survival adaptation of all. Nix looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, a small blue-green planet orbited an unremarkable yellow star. A planet whose inhabitants had evolved in conditions so challenging that they had developed capabilities the rest of the galaxy could barely comprehend. I believe, he said slowly, we need to reconsider our place in the galactic hierarchy. If Earth is a death world, what does that make its children? No one had an answer, but all of them suspected that the galaxy was about to find out.